The Alpha King hated me, but his wolf chose me as his Luna. Mateo Vance spent 40 minutes telling me exactly how insignificant I was to his court, but his wolf spent that same 40 minutes trying to lick the archive ink off my fingers. It is incredibly difficult to maintain a blood-chilling royal rejection when your own subconscious is whining like a golden retriever at a kitchen counter. I knew something was wrong before I saw him. I was 300 feet underground in the palace archives, cataloging a border treaty so old that the parchment had started arguing back, when I heard it. Not footsteps. Claws. Slow, heavy, deliberate, each one landing on the stone floor like a quiet decision being made. The kind of sound that should have made me drop my quill and run screaming for the stairwell. I finished marking my place in the ledger first. Then I looked up. The silver wolf was already halfway through the archive door. He had knocked over the bronze map stand on his way in. 2 inkwells had followed. The irreplaceable cartographic scroll of the Northern Reach, the one I had spent 11 days carefully restitching along the spine, was pinned under his left front paw like it was a doormat. He did not appear to notice any of this. He was looking directly at me with a pair of amber eyes, so steady, and so certain that my own chest did something I did not give it permission to do. He was enormous. I mean that in the way you mean it when the word enormous is not quite enough, and you need something bigger but cannot think of one fast enough. His shoulder blades were level with the top of my work table. His coat was the color of old silver, not bright, not flashy, just deep and pure and absolute, the kind of silver that does not apologize for being what it is. And he was looking at me the way you look at something you have been searching for so long, that finding it feels less like joy, and more like exhaling for the first time in years. I said, "You are standing on the Northern Reach." He did not move. That scroll is 312 years old. He wagged his tail. Once, slow, the tip of it knocked a stack of census records off the edge of the far shelf. That was when I heard the second sound, boots, fast, furious, and accompanied by the clank of guard armor coming down the corridor at a pace that suggested someone very powerful and very unhappy was trying to catch something he could not catch. The wolf heard it too. His ears rotated backward for exactly 1 second, like a man checking over his shoulder at a party. Then he looked back at me and sat down. Right on the Northern Reach. Mateo Vance came through that door like the room owed him an apology. He was still in his blood gala dress uniform, deep charcoal, silver cord at the shoulders, not a single thread out of place except for the expression on his face, which was several threads past undone. He was tall, sharp-jawed, built like someone had taken the concept of authority and made it into a person. And right now every single inch of him was radiating a very specific kind of fury that I had learned over 18 months of working in his court to recognize as the fury of a man who had just lost an argument with himself. His eyes found the wolf, then they found me. "He is not supposed to be here," he said. "I noticed," I said. He dragged me down 3 flights of stairs. I looked at the wolf looked at me, I looked back at Mateo. He seems very committed. Something moved behind Mateo's eyes that I do not have a clean word for. It was not embarrassment exactly. It was the look of a man watching a wall he built very carefully develop a crack he cannot explain and cannot stop. He crossed the room in 4 steps, grabbed the wolf by the scruff, and I want to be clear that grabbing a 900-pound silver wolf by the scruff should not work, and yet for 1 single second Mateo Vance's king energy was so absolute that the wolf actually paused. Then the wolf leaned sideways, dropped his enormous head into my lap, and closed his eyes. I did not move. Mateo's hand was still in the air, where the wolf's scruff used to be. The silence in that archive was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I should back up. I should tell you what happened 4 hours earlier at the blood gala, because you need to understand what made that silence so loud. What made that wolf sitting in my lap feel like the punchline to a joke the universe had been building for 18 months. The blood gala was mandatory. Every ranking member of the Vance court, from the highest warrior general to the lowest palace staff with a clearance seal, was required to attend the lunar season opening. I had a clearance seal, I had never wanted one less than I did that night. The gala was held in the Grand Mirror Hall, a room so deliberately beautiful that it felt like an insult to anyone who had not been born into the kind of bloodline that gets to stand in rooms like that without flinching. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures along the east wall, each one carved into the sigil of a warrior house. Foreign delegates in their finest, watching everything with the careful, measuring eyes of people who have come to decide whether the Vance kingdom is still worth respecting. I stood near the back. I was good at near the back. I was holding a glass of something sparkling that I had not asked for and was not going to drink when Mateo Vance stepped to the center of the room, and the crowd split for him, the way crowds only split for people who have never once in their lives had to ask. He was doing a review. A formal court review, standing in front of the foreign delegation, reciting the ranking and function of every court member. It was tradition. It was theater. It was fine until he got to my name. Gemma Rossi, he said, and his voice carried the way voices carry in rooms built for carrying, every syllable clean and cold. Archive clerk, third-tier palace staff, non-combat lineage, no ranking house affiliation. He paused, not because he had lost his place, because he had not. Her presence on the court roster is a clerical inheritance from the previous administration and is under active review for reassignment. Clerical inheritance, under active review, in front of every foreign delegate in the room. I did not move. I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you can do when someone is trying to shrink you in public is to refuse to get smaller. I kept my shoulders back. I kept my face neutral. I cataloged the moment the way I cataloged everything, filed it, labeled it, set it on the shelf inside my chest where I keep the things I do not have time to feel yet. Mateo had moved on before the silence finished settling. He was already gesturing toward the warrior generals, already shifting the room's attention forward with the effortless authority of someone who had never once wondered if he belonged somewhere. And then his wolf hit the bond. I did not know that was what it was at first. What I knew was that one of the ice sculptures along the east wall, the one carved into the Vance sigil, the largest one, easily 400 pounds of frozen craft, exploded sideways like something had walked through it without slowing down. The room went silent. The silver wolf walked out of the wreckage of the ice sculpture. He shook crystal dust off his ears. He looked around the room once, slowly, with the calm of someone who had arrived somewhere they had been meaning to get to for a long time. Then he looked at me. He crossed the entire length of the mirror hall. Delegates stepped back. Warriors stepped back. A footman dropped an entire tray of crystal glasses, and nobody looked at him because nobody could look away from the wolf moving in a straight, unhurried line through the center of the most important room in the kingdom. He stopped in front of me. He sat down. He wagged his tail. Once, slow, enormous. The silence that followed was the kind you could have pressed flowers in. Mateo regained control of himself in the span of about 4 seconds, which was honestly impressive, and what he said when he did was a very clipped, very controlled. "That is enough," directed at his own wolf, which was a sentence I deeply respected even while understanding it was not going to work. It did not work. I looked down at the wolf. The wolf looked up at me. He had amber eyes up close, not gold, not yellow, amber, the real kind, warm and deep and embarrassingly sincere. I said quietly, so that only he could hear it, "You are making a scene." He put his nose against my palm. And that was how I ended up back in the archives at midnight with 900 pounds of silver wolf in my lap, and the alpha king of the Vance court standing in my archive with his hand still in the air, where his wolf's scruff used to be. Mateo lowered his hand, slowly, with the energy of a man, choosing his next words like each one was a step across ice. "I am issuing a formal court order," he said, "relocating your position to the eastern outpost, effective end of week. The distance will break the bond's proximity influence." His voice was even, professional, like he was discussing a supply chain adjustment and not his own biology staging an open rebellion in my workspace. I looked at the wolf. The wolf's eyes were still closed. His breathing had gone deep and steady, The kind of breathing that belongs to something that has decided it is exactly where it is supposed to be. I picked up my quill. "I will need that order in writing," I said. "Stamped and witnessed, archive policy." Something passed across Mateo's face that I could not quite name. It was not anger. It was sharper than anger and quieter than it, and it lasted only a second before the cold came back down like a curtain. He turned and walked out of the archive without another word. His wolf did not follow. I sat in the low lamplight of my archive with 900 pounds of impossible silver warmth settled across my legs, the northern reach destroyed beneath his paw, ink drying on my fingers, and I did what I always do when I do not know what else to do. I went back to work. 3 days into the standoff, I stopped being surprised by the sound of claws on stone. That was probably not healthy. Most people, when a 900-pound silver wolf had taken up informal residence near the entrance to their underground workplace, would have filed a complaint or at minimum asked a question. I made a second cup of tea instead. I had started brewing 2 cups every morning without thinking about it, one for me, one that sat cooling on the edge of the work table closest to the door. I did not examine that habit too carefully. The wolf always arrived before Mateo did. That was the pattern. The wolf would appear at the archive entrance, settle himself against the wall just inside the doorway, and go quiet in the way large, powerful things go quiet when they have decided the place they are in is exactly right. Then, somewhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours later, depending on what I suspected, was the intensity of the internal argument happening inside one very frustrated alpha king, Mateo would arrive. He always had a reason, a document he needed pulled, a historical record requiring verification. Once, memorably, a question about Northern Border survey methodology that he asked with the stiff formality of a man who had rehearsed it 3 times in a corridor before walking through the door. I answered the question. I did not point out that he could have sent a courier. We both understood the shape of what was happening, and we had reached an unspoken agreement to not say it out loud, because saying it out loud would have required one of us to do something about it. He stayed 2 hours that day. We argued about whether the 1743 Boundary Commission had intentionally gerrymandered the Eastern Ridge settlements or simply made an administrative error with enormous consequences. He was wrong. I told him so. He did not like being told so. The wolf watched the argument from the doorway with the expression of someone very pleased with how the evening was going. I thought about that, the 3 of us in the low lamplight of the archive, old maps spread between us, Mateo's voice going sharp and precise when he disagreed, my own voice staying flat, and even because I had the documentation and documentation does not need to raise its voice. I thought about how that was the longest conversation I had held with another person in months that did not involve someone looking slightly past me. The way people in this court had learned to look at me, like I was a minor fixture in the room rather than a person standing in it. I did not linger on that thought. I filed it on the shelf with the others and went back to work. The forgery I almost missed. It came in as part of a routine batch of confiscated estate documents, a disputed noble property claim filed by Duke Marcello against a minor house in the Southern Territories. Dry material. The kind of paperwork that arrives in my archive in stacks and gets processed in order. No drama, no priority flag. I had been working through the batch for 2 days before I pulled the Rossi family registry. My family name stopped my hand for exactly 1 second. Then I kept moving, because that is what you do when you have spent years building a wall between yourself and the thing behind it. The registry was standard format: birth records, lineage chain, house affiliations going back 4 generations. I was scanning for inconsistencies in the property boundary descriptions when the ink caught my eye. It was the blue, not wrong in a way that screamed at you, wrong in the way that only registers if you have spent years handling documents old enough to have personalities. A shade too consistent, too even, without the natural fatting that iron gall ink develops as it oxidizes across decades. Old ink breathes. It shifts. It tells you where it has been by the way it sits on the page. This ink was lying perfectly still. I set the registry down. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I went to the supply cabinet at the back of the archive and retrieved the acid wash solution I used for document restoration work, a mild mixture, enough to test ink composition without destroying the page. I applied a single drop to the bottom corner of the registry, the corner nobody would check. The synthetic binding agent in the ink bled immediately. It spread in a thin, spidery ring that told me everything I needed to know about when that ink had actually been made. The compound it contained had not existed until approximately 2 years ago. This document, dated 60 years back, was carrying chemistry that had not been invented yet when it was supposedly written. Underneath the blue, where the acid wash had lifted the top layer, I could see the ghost of a seal, pressed into the paper, faint but there. I recognized the crest. I had catalogued enough of Duke Marcello's official correspondence to know his seal the way you know a face you see every week. The particular angle of the falcon's wing on the left side, the double border ring. I sat with that for 4 minutes. I counted them on the clock above the archive door because I needed something concrete to hold on to while the floor shifted under everything I thought I knew about my own life. My family had not lost our standing. Our standing had been taken. There was a difference between those two things so enormous that I needed the full 4 minutes just to begin to understand the size of it. The Rossi registry had been rewritten. Our house affiliation, our lineage chain, our blood record, altered by a man powerful enough to access the original documents and careful enough to do it in ink that would fool anyone who was not specifically looking for it. Except that he had not counted on the documents eventually landing in the archive of the one person in the palace who notices when ink is lying. I did not go to Matteo. I want to be clear about that because I know how it sounds, and I know what the obvious move was. But information held is information protected. That is the first rule I had ever learned in this work, and it is the only rule that has never failed me. I did not know yet what Marcello had buried. I did not know how deep it went. Walking into the king's council chamber with one acid-washed corner of one document and a theory was not protection. It was exposure. I wrapped the registry in clean linen. I placed it inside the false-backed lower drawer of my oldest filing cabinet, the one that looked like it had not been opened since the previous century because I had made sure it looked that way. I went back to the rest of the batch and kept working. My hands did not shake. I was proud of that. The council session happened the following morning, and I heard about it the way I hear about most things in this palace, through the underground current of whispers that travels faster than any official announcement and arrives to me through Dara, the head laundress, who treats court gossip as a civic responsibility. Matteo had called a formal session. He had the exile decree in hand, my relocation to the eastern outpost, signed and sealed, ready to be read into the official record. Dara said the room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something important is about to happen and everyone knows it. He got 3 sentences into the reading. What came out of him after that was not the decree. What came out of him was a sound, low, flat, absolute in the old tongue, the language that does not ask permission and does not explain itself. A single word that meant no in a register so deep it did not come from his throat. It came from somewhere older than that. His wolf had taken his voice in the middle of a formal council session and used it to refuse a direct royal order in front of every ranking member of the Vance court. Dara said the quills stopped, all of them, at once. She said Beta Corvin, who had been sitting to the king's left, wrote something in his personal notes with the calm of a man who had perhaps been expecting this specific development and had simply been waiting for the date. His expression, Dara told me, did not change at all. I was sitting in my archive when she told me this, holding my morning tea with both hands, and I did something I almost never do in front of other people. I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a managed one. A real one, small and quick, that I pressed back down almost immediately because it was not appropriate to find joy in the Alpha King's ongoing biological humiliation. But I did find joy in it. A little, I am being honest. Dara left. I went back to my documents. The morning moved quietly. I was cross-referencing 2 property survey maps when I heard footsteps at the archive entrance, light ones, deliberate ones, the kind that belong to someone who has practiced making themselves sound unthreatening and has gotten very good at it. Lady Bianca stood in the doorway looking like a painting of exactly what a future queen was supposed to look like. She was dressed in pale rose silk with her dark hair pinned, in a style that probably had a name I did not know. And she was holding a small, cream-colored request slip between two fingers the way people hold things when they want you to understand that touching it is beneath them. She needed a genealogy document, she said. The Aldenmore House lineage chain for the delegation records. Completely routine. She was very gracious about it. She smiled at me the way you smile at someone you have already categorized and filed away in a drawer marked unimportant. I pulled the document. I handed it over. I watched her hands. I watch hands because hands tell you what faces have learned to hide. Her hands were steady, perfectly steady, but her eyes moved once, just once, to the far corner of the archive. The corner near my oldest filing cabinet. It was a fast look, casual, the kind designed to not look like a look. Most people would not have caught it. I caught it. She thanked me. She left. Her footsteps going back up the corridor were as careful and even as they had been coming down. I stood still for a moment in the quiet she left behind. Then I walked to the archive door and looked at the frame. I was not sure what I was looking for. I found it anyway, a single thread, silver and fine, caught on the rough stone at shoulder height. Too fine for clothing, too deliberate for accident. I did not touch it. I memorized the position of it, the exact height, the angle. Then I went back to my table, opened my notebook to a clean page, and began to write down everything I had noticed in the order I had noticed it, with the precise, unhurried hand I used for documents that needed to be airtight. My family's registry, the forged ink, Marcello's seal, the look, the thread. I did not know yet what shape the trap was, but I knew a trap was being built, and I knew that I was inside it, and I knew that the only way out of a trap is to understand it better than the person who set it. I wrote until the lamp oil ran low. Then I locked the notebook in the same false-backed drawer as the registry, pressed my hand flat against the cabinet front for just a moment like I was making a promise to it, and started a fresh pot of tea. The wolf appeared at the archive entrance an hour before midnight. He did not crash through anything tonight. He came in quietly, with a kind of careful gentleness I had not seen in him before, and he settled himself close, closer than usual, close enough that his warmth reached me where I sat. He rested his chin on the edge of my work table and watched me with those amber eyes that were too steady and too knowing for something that was supposed to be an animal. I looked at him for a long moment. "There is something coming," I told him, not a question. He exhaled slowly through his nose. His eyes did not leave my face. I nodded once. Then I picked up my quill, dipped it, and went back to work, because I could not stop what was coming by worrying about it. I could only make sure that when it arrived, I was ready, and my records were clean, and the truth was somewhere they could not reach it. That was the only kind of armor I had ever known how to build. And so far, it had never let me down. They came for me at dawn. 2 palace guards, formal uniforms, not making eye contact, which is how you know it is official, and how you know the person sending them feels at least a small amount of something about it, because guards who feel nothing look right at you. These 2 looked at the wall just past my left ear and recited the confinement order in flat, rehearsed voices, while I stood in my archive doorway still holding my morning tea. Palace confinement. Pending investigation into allegations of unauthorized mystical interference with a ruling alpha's cognitive function. That was the formal language for what Marcello was accusing me of. Witchcraft, mind corruption, using dark means to destabilize the king. I drank the last of my tea. I set the cup down on the work table with a small, clean click. I picked up my evidence folio, the one I had prepared 2 nights ago, the one with the linen-wrapped registry and my notebook, and the chemical test results written out in my clearest hand, and I walked out of my archive with the 2 guards behind me. They put me in a room on the 3rd floor. Stone walls, 1 window with a view of the eastern courtyard, a chair, a small table, a lamp. The guard outside my door was professional and polite and absolutely not going to let me leave. I sat in the chair. I put the folio on the table. I looked at the window. I thought about my mother. I do not do that often because it costs something every time, but I did it then. She had been the one who taught me the archive work, not as a career, not as a practical skill, but as a way of understanding the world. She used to say that the past does not disappear. It just waits in the records for someone patient enough to find it. She had been patient. She had spent her whole life being patient, being careful, staying small enough not to draw the wrong kind of attention, and it had not saved her. The records had been altered before she ever had a chance to find them. I was not going to be patient in the way she had been patient. I was going to be patient in the way that builds something. I spent the first hour memorizing the room. Not dramatically, I just looked at everything, the way I look at a new document before I start working on it. Understood the shape of it. Then I thought about the palace's hidden passage system, which I knew better than almost anyone alive because I had spent 18 months cataloging the original architectural surveys from the 1600s, and the builders of this palace had been very thorough record keepers. There was a passage entrance behind the Eastern Archive shelving unit, which was unfortunately not in this room. But there was something else. The third-floor east corridor had been added in 1782 as a residential expansion, and the original 1690s servant access tunnel ran directly below it. The tunnel entrance had been sealed and plastered over, listed in the 1803 renovation notes as decommissioned. But the 1803 renovation crew had done the plastering themselves and had noted in their supply logs that they had run short on bonding compound and substituted a cheaper mixture for the lower sections. I had cataloged those supply logs personally. I remembered them because the foreman's handwriting was atrocious, and I had spent 20 minutes just deciphering his material notations. I moved the small table. Underneath it, in the far corner of the room where the baseboard met the floor, I pressed my palm flat against the plaster. It flexed. I worked carefully and I worked quietly, and it took me the better part of 3 hours. But the section came away in pieces that I stacked neatly against the wall, and the tunnel entrance behind it was exactly where the 1690 survey said it would be. Dark, low, smelling of old stone, and the particular cold that lives underground. I had spent enough time underground to find that smell comforting. I picked up my folio. I went in. I came up through a storage room adjacent to the Grand Mirror Hall 40 minutes before the Lunar Eclipse Summit was scheduled to begin. I could hear the hall already filling, the low, formal murmur of delegates and court members finding their positions, the particular acoustic quality of a room full of people performing the specific theater of high-stakes politics. I straightened my clothes. I tucked the folio under my arm. I walked out of the storage room and into the corridor like I was supposed to be there, because in every way that actually mattered, I was. The Grand Mirror Hall at eclipse season looked like someone had set the world on fire with cold light. The chandeliers were dimmed and replaced with lunar candles, pale silver flame that cast everything in shades of blue and white, turning familiar faces into something half-dream. The ice sculptures along the east wall had been replaced since the gala. New ones, larger, the Vance sigil cut sharp and perfect in fresh crystal. Foreign delegates lined the north side in their formal house colors. The Vance court occupied the south and center, warrior generals at the front, ranking nobles arranged behind them by blood precedence. Duke Marcello stood near the presentation dais with the expression of a man who had already won, and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. He was tall, well-built, silver-haired in the distinguished way that powerful men in this court always seemed to be silver-haired, like even their aging had been arranged for effect. Beside him, Lady Bianca stood in pale gold silk, her hands folded in front of her, her face arranged in the perfect expression of someone who feels nothing in particular about anything that is happening. I looked at her hands. There was a faint outline along the inside of her right sleeve, something rigid, something fitted to the shape of the arm and tucked above the wrist where the silk draped loose enough to hide it. I looked at Matteo. He was standing at the head of the dais in full formal dress, and he looked like what he was, a king, absolute and unreadable, carrying the weight of the room the way he always carried weight, like it was simply the natural condition of his existence. But his jaw was set in a way I recognized now. The way it set when the internal argument was active, when the man and the wolf were pulling in different directions, and he was spending energy holding the line between them. His eyes found me the moment I walked in. I do not know how in a room that full, but they did. He went very still. I walked to the center of the floor. The room noticed. Rooms always notice when someone who is supposed to be somewhere else arrives somewhere they are not supposed to be, and the particular quality of the silence that spread from where I was standing outward told me that my absence from confinement had not yet been announced, which meant I had a small window before chaos became the dominant note of the evening. Marcello turned. His expression did not change, but his eyes went flat in the way eyes go flat when someone has just complicated a plan that was going very smoothly. "Clerk Rossi," he said, with the smooth, practiced patience of a man accustomed to managing inconveniences publicly. "I believe you were asked to remain in your quarters this evening." "I was," I said. My voice came out even. I was grateful for that. I had somewhere more important to be. I turned to the nearest palace attendant. I asked, in my clearest archive voice, for a basin of acidic document wash, the kind used for restoration work, available in the palace supply room directly adjacent to the hall, which I knew because I had written the supply room inventory myself. The attendant looked at Marcello, then at me. Then he went to get it, because I had asked with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who fully expects to be obeyed, and sometimes that is enough. Marcello stepped forward. He was still smiling. "The clerk appears to be experiencing some distress. Understandable, given the allegations. Perhaps someone should escort her back to." "You forged my family's registry," I said. The room went quiet in a different way than it had before. This was not the quiet of surprise. This was the quiet of a room collectively deciding whether to breathe. "That is an extraordinary claim," Marcello said. "Yes," I said, "it is, which is why I tested it." The attendant came back with the wash basin. I set it on the presentation table. I opened my folio, took out the linen-wrapped registry, and laid it flat. I applied the acid wash to the lower quarter of the document in front of every delegate, every warrior general, every court member and foreign witness in that room. The synthetic ink bled. The binding agent spread in its thin, spidery ring, and Marcello's seal surfaced from underneath like something that had been waiting a very long time to be seen. The silence after that was the kind that has weight. I reached into my folio again. I took out my written record of the silver thread, the height, the angle, the location on the archive doorframe. I described what the thread was, a component of an ancient binding collar, silver-threaded, designed to lock a shifter permanently in wolf form when triggered during a lunar eclipse. I described where the collar currently was, which was in Lady Bianca's right sleeve, above the wrist. I looked at Bianca when I said it. She did not reach for the sleeve. She was smarter than that. But her stillness was the wrong kind of stillness. The held, managed stillness of someone controlling a very specific impulse, and the guards who moved toward her were reading the same thing I was. They found the collar. Marcello moved fast for a man his age. He was not reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for a small, glass-sealed vial on the inside of his jacket, and he broke it before anyone could cross the room to stop him, and the mist that came out of it was not silver or white or any of the colors you would pick for something dangerous. It was faintly gold, almost pretty. Sirenor. I knew what it was from the historical records, 3 documented uses in the past 4 centuries, all of them classified under the archive's restricted military history collection. It drove shifters into blind, feral rage. It did not affect humans. It affected everyone else in that room almost immediately. The warrior generals near the front went rigid, then wrong, their eyes losing focus in a specific way that meant the rational mind was being swallowed by something older and louder. 2 of the foreign delegates' guards shifted involuntarily, partial shifts, uncontrolled, which is the kind of thing that causes wars. The room fractured into noise and movement, and the particular specific chaos of a space full of powerful beings losing the thread of themselves all at once. And Matteo. I turned to Matteo. He was still standing. still upright. But his eyes had gone fully amber, the human brown gone entirely, and his hands were curved at his sides in a way that was not human, fingers too rigid, knuckles white with the effort of not becoming something else. His wolf was trying to surface, and the mist was corrupting the shift, trapping the two halves of him in a place between human and animal, where neither one could function. And the expression on his face was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, because it was not rage. It was fracture. It was a man feeling himself come apart and not being able to stop it. Everyone in that room moved away from him. That is what you do when an alpha king is losing control. Every instinct, trained or natural, says you create distance. You get out of the path. You do not put yourself between a fracturing alpha and his next breath. I walked toward him. I heard someone behind me say my name. I think it was Beta Corvin. I did not stop. The old texts about the first vanguard were not dramatic. They were not mystical in the way people use that word to mean flashy or strange. They described something much simpler and much harder. The vanguard's function was to be a fixed point. When an alpha's internal order collapsed, the vanguard did not fight the wolf and did not try to contain it. They gave it somewhere to return to, a line that held when everything else was moving. I did not know what my dormant lineage would actually do when I activated it. I did not have a manual. I had 3 archival references, 2 of which were fragmentary, and one very clear sentence from a 1421 primary source that I had read so many times in the past 2 days that I could see it written in the air in front of me. The vanguard does not reach for the wolf. The vanguard simply stands, and the wolf finds its way home. I stopped in front of Mateo. His amber eyes were on me, and they were not entirely seeing me, not the way eyes see when there is a whole person behind them. He was very close to gone. I could feel the wrongness of it in the air between us, the way you can feel a storm before it arrives. I put my hand on his chest. Right over his sternum, flat-palmed, the way you put your hand on something to tell it you are there. His whole body flinched at the contact, a full-body shudder like something surfacing through cold water. I said his name, not the title, not the rank, the name. Mateo. He stopped. Not gradually, all at once. Like a sound cutting off. His breathing went ragged for one long second, and then it slowed, and the amber in his eyes did not disappear, but it settled, the wild, unfocused quality of it pulling back into something present and aware. His hand came up and covered mine where it rested on his chest. Not gently. Firmly, the way you hold something you thought you had lost. What happened next took about 4 minutes and required Beta Corvin, 12 palace guards, and the formal invocation of the Vance Emergency Security Protocol, which I also happened to have archived. Marcello was detained before he reached the hall's east exit. Bianca surrendered the collar without resistance and with the expression of someone recalculating a very long series of decisions. The Sirenor mist dispersed faster than the historical record had suggested it would, which I made a note to correct in the archive documentation later. The fractured court members came back to themselves in stages. The foreign delegates were guided to a secure anteroom by palace staff. The hall quieted the way things quiet after a storm, slowly, and with a lot of debris still settling. Mateo had not let go of my hand. He looked at me, fully looked at me, both parts of him present and integrated in a way I had not seen from him before, the cold authority and the amber warmth occupying the same space without fighting each other. And what I saw on his face was not the expression of a king managing a situation. It was just a man, looking at the person who had walked toward him when every rational instinct said to walk away. He started to speak twice, stopped both times. The third time, what came out was quiet enough that only I could hear it. "I was wrong," he said, "about what you were, about what you are, about all of it." These were not fancy words. They were not a speech. They were 4 sentences from someone who was genuinely bad at this and was doing it anyway because it was true and because not saying it was no longer something he was willing to do. I understood the cost of them. I had spent enough time around pride to know what it looks like when someone sets it down. I did not make it easy for him. I want to be honest about that. I did not say it is fine, or you did not know, or any of the things you say to smooth the moment over and let someone off the hook they earned. I looked at him for a long moment with my hand still on his chest and his hand still over mine. Then I said, I know. The formal proceedings happened over the following hours. Marcello and Bianca were stripped of their lands and titles before dawn, the charges read into the official record by Beta Corvin, who produced the relevant legal documentation from his cloak with an efficiency that strongly suggested he had been carrying it for some time. The forged registry was entered as primary evidence along with my chemical test results and written record. The foreign delegation was briefed, formally and thoroughly, by Matteo himself, who stood in the restored hall and addressed the damage with the kind of unflinching directness that I understood now was actually his most honest quality. He was not a warm man. He was a truthful one. And in that moment, that mattered more. The Luna bond acceptance was my decision. I want that to be clear, and I want it to be in the record, because I was not going to step into the most significant role of my life as something that happened to me. Matteo understood that. He sat across from me in the small council room they had moved us to, with Corvin as witness, and he waited while I read every clause of the formal bond acknowledgement document, which I had asked to draft myself. He did not rush me. When I finished reading, I looked up at him. The wolf was visible in his eyes, not dominant, not fighting, just there, warm and steady and patient in the way he had always been patient with me even when the man was not. I signed the document. The first official order I filed as Luna of the Vance Court was a materials requisition for the new Royal Archive Room. Oak desks, reinforced leg brackets, iron scroll cases with fitted lids, and a full replacement set of cartographic materials for the Northern Reach collection, which had been destroyed by a 900-pound silver wolf, who still, to this day, did not appear to feel particularly sorry about it. The second thing I did was brew 2 cups of tea. I set one on my side of the new desk and one on the far edge, close to the door. The wolf appeared in the archive entrance 11 minutes later, moving with the same quiet deliberateness he had used the night everything changed. He came all the way in this time. No crashed map stands. No toppled ink wells. He settled himself beside my chair, pressed his enormous silver head against my knee, and exhaled the long, slow breath of something that has finally, after a very long time, come home. I put my hand on his head. I picked up my quill with the other one. Outside the archive, in the halls above us, the palace was loud with the aftermath of everything that had happened. People talking, guards moving, the formal machinery of a court reorganizing itself after a crisis. All of it necessary, all of it real. But down here the light was low and gold, and the air smelled like old parchment and lamp oil, and the wolf was warm against my leg, and I had work to do. So I did it.